remarkable movie. So this is really cool. I'm so glad that you're here. 10 years ago, Brit Marling came out here to Los Angeles with an idea that she wanted to be part of the art that we create out here, and she started, and instead of waiting and for someone to ask her to do it, she sort of created her own opportunities. And the fruits of those labors became 2 films in the Sundance Film Festival. She became the first person to star and write 2 films that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2011. Both of those films sold to Fox Searchlight, and in the 4 years since, she's been doing some incredible work in crafting films, working in films like the one we just saw, The Keeping Room, which is really, I'm still shaken up by it. I don't know how you guys are feeling about it, but that was really intense. But anyway, I'm very, very proud to welcome Brit Marling.
Hi guys, thanks for watching the movie and staying.
Well, I want to ask a lot about your career, but let's just start with this film right here, because we were all sort of just blown away by it. The Keeping Room, how did it speak to you? What about it made it something that you needed to say at this point in your life, and something you needed to be a part of?
That's such a good question. I guess it's really rare to be sent scripts where you feel the moment that you put them down that you must do them. At least I haven't had that experience that often. Hi, Annie. Sorry. We have a lot to say to each other.
You two know each other, I take it?
Yeah. Sound of My Voice. We worked on Sound of My Voice too.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Oh, yes.
And the recordist, yeah. Anyway, so Julia Hart wrote the film, and she went to high school actually with a friend of mine, and that friend from high school called me up and was like, "I read this script called The Keeping Room. It's so stunning. It's so different. It's like a feminist revisionist Western, and there's this amazing character Augusta in it, and you've just got to play it." And I was like, "Oh, cool." And I was like, "Well, what else has she written?" And she's like, "This is the first thing." And I was like, "Oh, cool." And she's like, "And she's an English teacher. She's been teaching English for 10 years." And I was like, "Really? Okay." And then I was like, "Great. No, I'll read it tonight." And then I was thinking, I was exhausted, and I was like, "I'm just going to read the first 10 pages until the." And I sat down and read the first 10 pages, and it started with that scene with the woman facing off with a dog and barking at each other, and the dog sort of standing down, and I was like, what? It was so original and fresh and provocative, and then I got completely swept up in the story of these 3 young women who were going to find a way to defend themselves against sort of impossible odds. And I read the script twice in one setting, and then by that point, it was like 6 a.m, and I called my manager, and I was like, "I'm sure they've offered this to somebody else, but like, can we fight for this? Is there any way I can do this?" And then it was sort of that slow process of meeting everybody involved and trying to convince them that I'd be right for it, and then I got to do it. Yeah.
I imagine the physicality of the role must have been super cool. I mean, you got to chop wood, ride horses, shoot dudes, get shot. Talk about the...
I shot some dudes,
yeah. Talk about the physicality of it. I mean, you got to ride horses in this
movie,
right?
I did, and I
do you ride a lot of horses in your life, or is this a rare opportunity?
All the time, just roll up on Whole Foods in Santa Monica on my horse.
You can't even get a good horse park.
You can't anymore. It's all hybrids and stuff. I knew a little bit about horseback riding but nothing like this. And so I started training here with somebody, and then went to Romania. And the horse that's in the film, that beautiful horse Zahara, is just this incredible creature. And I spent a good 3 weeks training pretty intensively. 4 hours a day, that wood chopping, all of it. It was exhausting. It was physically overwhelming. But the amazing thing about that is that I'd never done something this physical before, and you reach a place where you're so tired that you can't think anymore.
Right.
So even if you wanted to go to set with an idea of what you might do, or all your, imagining, daydream, all that work that you've done to prepare, you arrive like such a shell of who you are that you stop thinking and start just behaving, just being and responding. So that was an amazing gift in terms of learning that about acting, that that sometimes it's best to throw everything out the window, and physical exhaustion can just
Right.
take you to that place. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing what riding a horse and shopping wood all the time might do to a person.
Exactly right. Yeah, I highly recommend it.
Now, there are lots of remarkable scenes in the film, but one that I'd like to see if you'd be willing to talk about a little bit is the one where you're telling the story to the sister, and that was an incredible scene. And can you talk about your process for shooting that scene and where you were at? I mean, talk the prep led up to it, and just what that scene was for you.
Yeah, it's funny. I just did the DVD commentary with Julia Hart, who's the writer, the other day for this. I hadn't seen the film in a while, and as we were watching it and talking about it, which I'd never done before, it's a totally hilarious process. She reminded me that that scene wasn't in the first draft, and I remember coming to Julia and being like, I feel like Augusta is so powerful and she's so intense, but like, when are we going to see her vulnerability? Like, when are we going to remind the audience that she's a girl and that she's never left this property before and that she doesn't really know anything and that she's on her own and that she's terrified? And I was like, is there some way when she comes back, maybe what I said was, could she Shahrazad her, which was like my idea of like 1001 Arabian Nights. Was there some way that she comes and tells this story, and in telling the story, it's a reprieve from all this like suffering they've gone through, and then after that, she can kind of unravel. And Julia was like, well, wait, why doesn't she just tell the story of Shahrazad? And so she wrote that beautiful story in there, and then we did it, and it was. I think every time you go to shoot a movie, there are like a couple of scenes that are the ones that are going to be really intense.
Yeah, right.
And that was one of them. But I was never worried about it. Something about when the writing is so elegant, you get to just show up and do it, and it will take you there. And then I remember.
Do you have a trick for not psyching yourself out, like not circling that date in a red pen and sort of like getting yourself all too psyched up about it?
Yeah, I know about that. I've done that before. Part of it was the sheer exhaustion on this,
Yeah,
I think.
right.
And I did learn that like whenever I started to get a little anxious, like all I had to do was like wake up a bit early and like just chop some wood on set before we started. And that really will get you in the zone. I remember doing something with Michael Pitt, this film I Origins.
Yeah.
And he would sometimes come on set, and if he couldn't like get out of himself, he would have someone pick up one of the sandbags on the light stands, and he'd just start beating the shit out of the sandbags. And I remember watching that and being like, maybe there's something in that's useful. So I did some of that on set, but I think also that day I tried to just to not have a plan and to like in real time really convince the girl in front of me that it was all going to be okay, even though I was pretty certain it was not.
Right.
And the other thing is Muna Otaru in this film, who's fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, stunning actress. She's amazing, right? Her story is incredible. So she came in to read for the first part, the woman that walks in and has the face-off with the dog. I think there's like one line or possibly a note. I don't even know if there is dialogue in that scene. And she came in to do that, and the actress who was going to play her role, Nicole Bahari, had just fallen out of the part because Sleepy Hollow had come together, and so she had to go do that. And so the director, Daniel Barber, was just like, do you want to cold read this monologue? And just in the room, he hands her the monologue that happens in the keeping room, that sort of gut-wrenching, and she just cold read it on the spot. And I remember Julia and Jordan who produced the film, sending me that tape. And you were just like, oh, well, there it is. Like, that's the performance. Like, could we put that shot in the movie? Like, she was so visceral and alive and had so much that she was ready to give. So she was in that room during that scene. And I remember at the end, I don't think this was originally scripted, at the end, I just like looked up at her. She had been sort of borne witness to the whole thing. And it really became, so much of the movie became about, I think, that reverse shot of Augusta and Mad looking at each other, and Augusta coming to realize that the intensity of this day that they've been through is something that she knows about in a way that Augusta has never fully understood.
Right.
And there's this kind of, I think they become sisters in that moment, in sisters bonded in a kind of understanding of loss and like suffering, and are we going to even make it through this night? And
Well, their relationship progresses. I mean, there's so many moments in their relationship, and that was one of the sort of keystone.
Pivotal.
Yeah, the pivots.
Yeah, really it was.
So have you been able to use your wood chopping skills in real life, or is it just something you do on movie sets?
I try not to tell too many people about it so that I don't have to do the wood chopping, we're out camping. But no, it's actually, I learned, someone here taught me, a stunt guy. Jordan was like, we've set up this meeting with this guy in this valley, you're going to learn to chop wood. And I was like, is it that hard? Like, shouldn't I just be able, and it really is difficult. Like, you have to hit it in the right place. I mean, by the time I had done like 2 hours of lessons, my thumbs were all bloody and I had these terrible, it's a really serious. So no, if somebody asked me if I can chop wood, I'm just like, no, I can't.
I'm telling you.
But you all know this.
We have witness.
You guys can ask me to chop wood and I'll come chop wood.
So I mentioned 10 years, about a decade in Los Angeles. Talk about the decision to move to Los Angeles and to pursue a career as an actress. Was that a difficult decision for you, and did you have a plan when you came out here?
Yeah, I mean, I still think it was a difficult decision. I don't know that it ever stops being a difficult decision.
It was a good decision.
It was, oh, good. I think, if you think so, will you call my mom and tell her so?
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's, no, I didn't have a very good plan. I think I came out here and I thought, I mean, it's a crazy thing to decide to do, because one of the things that's so beautiful about being an actor is that you're waiting for the stories that you feel you have something to offer to, and there's something really like delicate and generous about that. It's not like you can just pick up the paint and start painting alone in your studio until you get great at something. You really rely on other people and a collaboration, and I think that's beautiful and extraordinary. At the same time, it can be tremendously frustrating, especially if a lot of the stuff that comes through for young women is just disappointing. I mean, it's yeah, right? And I think that's starting to change, but in some ways it starts to change in a good way, and in other ways it's like there's such a sort of dialogue or fervor about it now, and a lot of it doesn't feel like it's fully got it right yet. Like it's putting women as protagonists, but not fully being feminist in its feeling, I guess, maybe. So it's hard to figure that all out. So I think at some point I just thought, I've got to be a part, I've got to start writing so that I can be a part of shaping that conversation, or at least try to offer up a version of what it might look like. And then, of course, you meet lovely people along the way, like Julia, who's a young woman writing, and I think you try to gather all the women together and put your heads together and figure out, okay, how can we get some of this stuff made, and becomes
It's one thing to say in the air, I need to write. I want to write. I should write something. And then to actually write something that doesn't stink.
Yes.
That's really hard.
I wrote a lot of things that stink. I could send them to you. They're really, it takes a long time.
What was your process for figuring out the stories that you wanted to tell, A, and B, how you were going to get them down, sort of structurally figuring out the process of writing?
I spent a lot of time at the downtown library, actually, just sitting with script. I was being sent a lot of bad scripts as an actor, which is the most useful, oddly, is to know what not to do. Because sometimes if you read an amazing script, like I think I've read Silence of the Lambs like 40 times. It's beautifully written. It's really hard to take it apart and see how the mathematics of that work, because it's just so, the great scripts are like that. It's hard to see.
Did you try?
I did. Yeah. I sat there page by page and I was like, okay, so this is, but then you get swept away and you stop sort of counting scenes or sequences or understanding how it works, or it took a long time. And I think a lot of it too was reading great books along. I found Story by Robert McKee very useful. I know that's sort of like a text everybody talks about, but sometimes the ones everybody talks about, they talk about for a reason. And then I think it was just a lot of trial and error and being really willing to fail, being really, I guess, willing to embarrass yourself, to share a first draft of something and have somebody be like, no, this isn't going to work, and I don't think there's anything you can do to fix this.
Right.
I think you've just let it go. And you've got to be like, oh, can I say fuck?
Yeah, you can.
You can be like, oh, shit, I just spent 2 years turning this idea over in my head, and I'll never be able to crack it. There's something fundamentally wrong with the story. And then to let that go and just be like, that's hard to do, and then to start another idea. So I think that in some ways it's kind of about an indefatigable spirit of just continuing to go in the face of everybody telling you that you're batshit crazy, and watching your friends who have done more traditional, like linear things, they're checking all the boxes, like got the law degree, got the corner office, got the real estate, doing the kids, now doing second marriage, and you're just like, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm still just trying to figure out how to pay my rent.
I'm just sitting in the library.
Yeah, I'm just sitting in the library reading, yeah. So.
Well, it obvious, I mean, I'm sorry, but you couldn't have struggled that long because you moved out here in 2005, and by 2011, you had 2 scripts that had been produced into films that were at the Sundance Film Festival.
Yeah, I think, but part of that, though, is I found, I was really fortunate in college. I met 2 amazing filmmakers, and we started trying to do stuff, and one of them went to the AFI, so I fell in with that group of people, and we were all talking, and there was a real spirit of, like, tribalism.
Right.
Like I think the thing of it is you really can't do it by yourself. And there's this sort of, I think our culture is constantly spinning this myth of the like lone artistic genius who's just like, and it doesn't, especially in filmmaking, it just doesn't work that way. You've got to find, and so I think I got lucky because I had met them, and then together out here we were like, how can we pool together people who want to do cinematography and haven't yet, and someone who's been working as an assistant to a costume designer that's just waiting for an opportunity to prove, herself. And it becomes a lot, I think, about putting your producer hat on and figuring out how you can pull a group together to make something. So it's really kind of how those early projects happen.
Well, there's nothing more magical really in life than finding a great creative partnership. And you managed to get 2 going kind of at the same time that led to sort of 2 immediate payoffs.
Yeah.
In terms of creative that how do you know when you're clicking creatively and talk about those relationships and maintaining creative relationships.
That's such a good question. I think they're like marriages. They're really complicated.
Yeah. Like bands or...
Yeah, like bands. There's like, and you go through phases in which you really understand each other and you vibe, phases in which you grow apart and you have to let each other go a bit and maybe you'll come back again. It's complicated that. But I think that as long as you continue to inspire one another is the thing that's useful. With both Mike and Zal, who we've done a couple of things all together now, I think they're both people who are always curious and interested about new things. And so we're always kind of putting like fresh clay on the table, I guess, in front of each other and being like, oh, have you read this? Or have you seen this? Or do you know about this composer? And I think something about that and the kind of generosity of spirit, like not worrying about what it's going to be or who's going to make it, but just kind of creating an open feeling, an open collective vibe, maybe. That's what we've tried to do anyway.
Now, you didn't study acting in college so much. You among other things, you were an economics major?
Yeah.
Now, did that help you in your creative endeavor in any way, or was that...
Fuck no.
So, remember that, kids. The economics is the useless degree. Go study poetry.
It really is. I think if I had studied history or philosophy, anything would have been, no, it was a terrible waste of time. It's only been good insofar as like I can read the Wall Street Journal and understand like all the things that are going wrong in the world, but I can't do anything about it. So it's just tremendously frustrating. That was terrible. But I do think, somebody was asking me the other day about studying acting. And of course, I think that's awesome and cool. I haven't done it, so I wouldn't know. But I think that there's something, I've talked to a couple of people who are actors, none of whom studied in school. Mm-hmm. And I think there is something interesting about that approach because you study something else or you're reading a lot of other things, and then you can kind of bring that point of view or perspective to the work. That in some ways is maybe difficult if you've just spent like your entire life, in the bubble of the theater or in acting. Like sometimes it's nice to get outside and study something else and then be able to bring that lens, I guess, to something.
So then how did it? I mean, what was the perspective that you got? Yeah.
I mean, maybe part of it was just, I think from economics, really the only thing I took was just a sense of discipline and like rigor. Like I'm not very good at math. and like I really had to work hard to try to make it make sense. And I think that discipline of like being able to sit in a chair for hours on end and wrap your brain around something that it didn't want to go around, I think that's essentially what screenwriting is you just like constantly sitting in the chair being like, how do I make this make sense? So maybe that part of it was...
The fact that you sort of knew instinctively that your first trip was down to the Central Library, when you and you applied that rigor to figuring out how to be a screenwriter and how to tell stories on screen, might have had something to do with it.
I think that was probably, that's a good one. I'm going to use that now. It's a good way to reframe my thoughts about my college years.
So here's a question from Shannon Corbet, who's here. Shannon? Hi. Oh, hey, you're right in front. Do you want to read it yourself? Okay. What was it like for you the first time you read your lines out loud? How did you find your character's voice?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I think maybe it's funny. I'm working on something right now with Zal Batmanglij, who directed The Recordist and Sound of My Voice and some of, and we were talking about, we've been in the writers' room on this show for a while that we're writing for Netflix, and the writers were all saying we forget that you're an actor in the room because we've been writers together for so long, and then at some point I have to go away and do the acting job. But I think it's kind of like a hat that you take off. You have to, I think, because at some point you have to take off the writer hat and take the script and be like, I accept this script, and my job is no longer to change the words to find truth, but to go beneath the words to find it. So it kind of, I think maybe that you have to forget they're yours. You kind of have to take it in as if it's like the way you take in any play, I guess, or any text and be like, something about this is like sacred and true, and now I'm going to just go dive deeper beneath it. So I try to do that. I don't know, does that answer that question properly? Yeah.
Especially because in this one you had the accent. So I'm
Yeah.
curious about how that came about.
That was complicated. Hailee Steinfeld, who's really terrific in this, she was also in LA at the time, and we found a really amazing dialect coach, and she and I would go together in the morning sometimes for 3 or 4 hours and just work the text over in our voices and try to make our sounds match each other. Because I think from the beginning we're like, well, we don't look that much alike, so like, how are we going to give this thing a vibe of being sisters? And then we all also on set had, like on our iPods or phones, dialect tapes. I never worked with the text itself, because I think then you start to it gets stuck in your head. But I think I would ask the dialect coach to just read random text like the encyclopedia or like, something, just an article off the internet. And then I would just listen to that in the morning as I was like brushing my teeth and like in the makeup chair where they just like sprayed us with dirt and then like put grease in our hair and then like threw mud in our face. Yes. And then they're like, okay, you're ready. And that whole time I was just listening to like all those sounds in my ears. So that by the time you get on set, you kind of take those out and you're like, yeah, I couldn't do that accent right now to save my life. I don't even remember it anymore.
It's interesting that we talk about finding the character's voice, because in the case of this movie, you sort of found a color of her that wasn't necessarily there in the script in an obvious way, but you sort of brought it up, like we mentioned, the kind of more, I guess, sensitive, less just a badass kind. So obviously that was there and speaking to you, but not necessarily on the surface. Maybe it was somewhere.
Yeah, I think. I think there was something about, I remember when we did the first costume fitting, and they had this terrific costume designer, a young Romanian girl, Luminita, her work was stunning. And the first fitting, she had these like pants and like this sort of shirt, and her idea was like, well, she's taken her brother's clothes and she's wearing those now. And I thought that over with Daniel and Julie, and I was like, I just don't think it's right. Like, I think there's something more dramatic about she's still dressing as a girl, and she has kept growing her hair out from the moment her brother and her father left her, and she's refused to cut it because the hair is like a chronology. It's like the recording of the time that they've been gone, and she's going to grow it till they come back. And those things are so feminine and fragile.
Right.
A dress pale blue with birds on it, this long hair. And that when you watch that girl fight to defend her home and her family, you really realize what the stakes are and how impossible it is. She's not like a superhero. I mean, that's one of the things I felt and talked a lot with Daniel and Julia about is I feel it's kind of frustrating when you're watching these films with these female action heroes and everything they're doing is impossible.
Right.
You know, it's this sort of like, I'm tied to the chair in my like super hot bodysuit and I'm gonna like drop kick 27 assassins and then like catch my cigarette and it's cool. Like I think it's
Obviously,
hot.
I just shaved yesterday.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
right?
I like to watch it. It's sexy, but I also, where are the movies where like the girls are kicking butt and doing it, you know, looking a little more real, you know, not doing totally impossible things, dealing with how hard it is to just pull the trigger one time.
Right.
Like how impossible the weight of taking a life, like what that you can think about it, but when you actually come to do it and someone's gonna die, even someone who's may kill you, how awful. And so I think we were trying to constantly infuse the story with that sincerity and stakes and not make it just be like a sort of, not make it easy, you
Right.
know, I guess.
I have to say, and I think I wasn't alone in feeling this while I was watching this movie, is that I was really psyched to be watching a Western. It was really cool to watch a Western. It was a really good Western, and it was cool that it was a Western. So,
Awesome.
do you? I mean, talk about. I mean, did you watch any movies like that, or did you conscientiously wanted to make a genre movie like that?
I love genre stuff. I think it's so cool. I love it because I think there's a quality about it that's really like, you just like lean into it. It's fun. And something about being able to talk about complex things like feminism and race and the Civil War, this time period that's like so beneath everything that's happening right now, that's sort of, it's cool to be able to do that and then to put a genre sort of home invasion lens over it so that it becomes accessible and interesting and entertaining on one level, and then on another level you're sort of smuggling all this interesting, more subversive cargo across.
That's what genre has always been. I mean,
yeah, it really, the great ones are always like the early zombie movies being about, so I
Right.
love that stuff. But I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think we really did. I think Julia wrote the script with that. I think that was really her intention. Was like, how can I take the Western and do a fresh feminist sort of take on it? And I think she really. I mean, I think it was in the script, and I think Daniel Barber really found it in the direction. And all the actors, we just tried to keep up with them. Yeah.
But this has obviously been an interest of yours above and beyond Westerns in this movie. I mean, you've done a certain similar thing with sci-fi.
Yeah.
Was there genre things when you were young that meant a great deal to you, that helped inform you to want to tell these stories now?
That's such a good question. I think when I was younger, it was more like sci-fi stuff. I really was moved by, I mean, even just like early Spielberg, that sense of wonder and awe in his movies. Like, I don't even know if you could make a movie like that now and get away with it. I think the audience has sort of become a bit more cynical, maybe. I don't know what, but like, I remember watching E.T. and really believing, and I love the idea that movies, that the sort of promise that the theater still has as a kind of cathedral is that a bunch of strangers are going to get together and sort of like surrender their disbelief to this impossible story and like go on this odyssey in the dark all together. I mean, it's a beautiful idea, and I always found it really moving, and I like the idea of trying to make stuff that leans into what that's the cinematic space is, which is it has to be inherently entertaining, I guess, first and foremost. So
And also, like you said, full of wonder.
Yeah,
But
full-
we're at this place now where when you try to sort of inject wonder into your movie, you're almost ripping off Spielberg, or
Yeah.
it's gotten to that point.
or it's like been replaced with spectacle,
That's
and then you're
right.
just like, well, this isn't wonder. It's actually really hard to get at wonder. You know, I guess maybe because we've seen so much, we're sort of a bit desensitized at this point, and you can sort of do anything with CGI, which is, I think, why a film like this is really cool, because it takes all the CGI out of the action. Like, the actors are just doing everything, and
Well, you have had the benefit in that respect of working on films that don't have gigantic budgets,
Yeah.
where they've had to figure out how to get this kind of wonder or magic or whatever the heck you want to call it,
Yeah.
without those kinds of tricks or without the stuff that you lard money to create.
Yeah.
And I mean, what is it? It's a cart before the horse. I mean, what came the chicken? Why did you?
What came first?
Yeah, what
Chickens,
attracted
eggs.
you? What attracted you to telling those types of indie types of stories that had those limitations? Is it because they had that, or?
I know what you mean. I think part of it is that, I mean, a lot of the really interesting scripts that I've read so far tend to be being made somewhat outside the system because that's sort of who will make them right now. I think that's really changing. I mean, I think as all these tech companies come in with all this, with like real capital and who are, I mean, tech coming from a space where you are encouraged to take risks because they're all looking for the like unicorn of an idea,
Right.
and that one unicorn of an idea is going to like bankroll the rest of their, and it's a different sort of space, I think, than where Hollywood is, which at least in a large part it seems to be very risk adverse, very like, okay, this was a success, how do I repeat this success, you know, in a kind of formulaic way that never seems to pay off. And I think what's cool about Amazon and Netflix and all these companies that are coming in from a tech side is that maybe some of these stories that are more adventurous or just like slightly avant-garde or subversive will find serious financing in a way that they maybe haven't been able to before.
A lot of actors talk about how they dealt with adversity, but I'd like you to talk about dealing with success. And in 2011, after the Sundance Film Festival, you had 2 films, and there was like 600 articles written about you, you know, that you were the darling of the Sundance Film Festival, you know, these types of things. And I'm sure after that, the color of everything is different than that. You're getting offers, you're like, suddenly money is in the conversation and people are dangling figures and you kind of have to figure out, wait, what do I want to do now that I actually do have some opportunities?
Yeah.
How did you kind of find your center during that period and sort of stay focused on telling the stories that you wanted to tell?
That's such a good question. I mean, I think that's such a good question. I think you're still trying to do it every day, all the time, and you don't really know who you are until people start presenting decisions in front of you with with serious consequences one way or the other, and you make a choice. And every time you make a choice, you sort of close some doors and open others. And I don't know, I think I felt very much that I could never play a part I didn't believe in, but also that I could never be a part of a larger story I didn't believe in. So I could never be like, well, it's okay, I'm going to be this character, even though I don't really believe in this larger thing or what it means or how it impacts the people who watch it. I mean, I think I still really a lot think about how I felt as a kid, like trying to find heroines to admire in the things that I was watching, and they were few and far between. And so I think about that all the time when I take on a part, no matter the size. I'm just like, if an 8-year-old daughter, if I had an 8-year-old daughter and she was watching this representation of a woman, like, how would I feel about that? And I don't know if that's the best way, you know, because it means you say no to a lot of things, and that closes a certain number of doors when you say no. But
you
I
have
think
to have some filter, right?
But you have to have some filter, and I think and I think also, I don't know how to separate art from politics. Like, they seem like the same thing to me, and I don't know, there's maybe some idea that in this culture that we're living in right now, that the most important thing is to become really celebrated, and that if you become very famous very quickly, then you can do whatever you want. I don't know. I mean, I think maybe if you make a lot of compromises to who you are along the way, I'm not sure you can be very impacting if you find yourself in that space because you've changed.
Right.
And so, I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out all the time, but I think you have a lot more power in saying no, maybe than I realized initially. That
Of
makes
course,
sense.
I have a feeling that agents and managers feel differently.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that they would not concur with
Yeah,
this statement. So
As a blanketed group, I think maybe not so much.
yeah,
no.
yeah. It's like, no, don't say no.
Yeah.
But so has it created issues or conflicts as you've tried to develop your sort of career and identity, that you do have this filter or sense of where you don't want to go as much as you do where you do want to go?
I mean, I'm really lucky. I've found really great people along the way, and I think that I think that because of that, that's been helpful. It's really a difficult thing if people who you're talking to a lot, who are, you know, fielding inquiries or showing you things or not showing you things or all that stuff, like, if they really disagree with you about what is a valuable life, then that's really a problem. But I think it's also about being very upfront and saying, okay, I'm probably the only client on your list, or I might be one of the few clients on your list who feels this way about the work, but this is how I feel. And really like outlining, you know, I mean, I've had this conversation with my lawyer recently about something. I was like, I know this is going to be a hard place to start, but I really don't care about the money. Like, I care about these other aspects of the contract, like my freedom to do this, my freedom to do the money doesn't, I'm not thinking about that right. And maybe, you know, of course that changes when you have kids and a family and you want to send your kid to college and all these things, but
There's plenty of time in your life where that will matter, but
yeah,
if it doesn't,
but if
then
you're
it's
not,
good.
if you're not, and you're in a space where, like, you know, I don't have like massive expenses, I have a little house, you know, I have a little place, I mean, then you have freedom suddenly. If the rent of your life doesn't get too high, you can sort of
Right.
always be like, no, I'm doing this other thing.
If you could go back and talk about one other sort of big decision that you made in your life, which is when you got out of college, you got a chance to get a really good fancy pants job on Wall Street in the financial sector, and you chose to go to Cuba to make a documentary film with a friend from college.
Yeah.
I imagine your parents
Even
are
just
still
hearing you
angry.
say it, it sounds fucking bananas. I'm like, don't do that. Yeah.
Well, I feel like on behalf of your parents, I just
Yeah.
want to say we're still pissed.
Okay, yeah, be pissed, man, be pissed.
No,
My
that just sounds
parents
like that sounds like something that's going to be brought up at Thanksgiving for the rest
Forever.
of. But that also sounded like that was the decision that kind of set you on the path that you are on
It totally
now, and you wouldn't have made that decision if you didn't really know what you wanted.
Yeah, you know, though, it's funny because in retrospect, you can construct a narrative. At the time, though, of course, you have no idea what the fuck you're doing. You're just
Right.
like, I know that working at this company, doing this job, doesn't feel good, and I feel like I'm gonna die early here. So you're like, I gotta get out. And then, you know, my friend Mike was shooting a thing in Cuba, and he's like, he had seen some short films I'd made in college, and he's like, come co-direct this with me. And I was like, well, my Spanish isn't that good, and I don't think I really want to be a documentary filmmaker. But you kind of just leap and say yes, and then you're there. And in retrospect now, I look back at that, and I'm like, oh, well, of course, the juxtaposition of like this one life in Manhattan versus going to Cuba and like having this experience where you became acutely aware of how important it is to you to love what you do and how not important it is to you to have a lot of things.
Right.
And like that, those experiences side by side smack together just totally changed the trajectory of my life. But you can't, when you're in it, it just feels like chaos. You know, I can look back at that now and construct the narrative, but I remember being in Havana and being lost and confused and like, you know, calling my sister and being like, have I made a big mistake? And I mean, all the doubt and the insecurity and the email I got from the staffer at Goldman who was like, somebody told me you think you're gonna be an artist, ha 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 ha. I remember getting that in Havana and being like, wow, okay.
That person is in jail right now. I'm sure that's something.
Insider trading. Yeah.
Well, it's been a remarkable first 10 years of your career. I hope maybe the SAG Foundation, 10 years from now, we can do this again and we can check in on
would
what you're
be
doing, and
awesome.
then maybe 10 years after that too. But anyway, thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
this
much.
lovely
Thank you
evening.
guys for watching
Thank
the
you.
film. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.